Rick, you are talking next with the former Deputy Director of GCHQ, Conrad Prince, and Alex Creswell, who led an operational division of GCHQ. He also served in the Cabinet Office. Both of these experts are a part of the Cipher Briefs expert network, which I'm very proud to say, and both of them have pieces that were published on cyber, one on Britain's new posture in terms of its future national security from Conrad Prince, and then another today on why cyber criminals seem to be winning from Alex. If you guys want to read those, which you should, thecipherbrief.com is the place where you'll find them. Rick, I'm going to turn this conversation over to you now, and I will be back with any last minute questions when you're ready.
Great, thanks, Suzanne. Conrad, Alex, you guys can start your video. There's Conrad, and there's Alex.
Hi there.
How are you guys?
Very good. Thank you.
What'd you think of the exercise?
Excellent. Really? Yeah, and I thought it really pulled out the complexity of the issues in these kind of scenarios, the need for that kind of close coupled intergovernmental, interdepartmental engagement, international engagement, and with the private sector as well. So I think it was really well put together and fascinating, really. Yeah.
Yeah, Rick, I thought that, you know, the points that Gilman and actually Dimitri made around how much the private sector does now and how actually it works together in a kind of well-meshed team, and they will be working to attribute you know, threats as they come, and they will be looking to be as helpful as possible. And I think that's you know, there is a big permeability between private sector cybersecurity actors and the US intelligence community, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I think one thing that folks should have gotten from all 3 days of the conference today is the importance of the private sector in this space. It really is critical. So you guys both wrote papers, and you have opinions on the state of cybersecurity these days. So why don't we talk about that? Conrad, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you very much, Rick. So I mean, I guess what I've been looking at recently is really where we are in the UK in terms of where we go next with cybersecurity, because this has been a pivotal time for us. This year will be pivotal. We've just in the UK launched our integrated review of defence, foreign policy, security, which has been the culmination of a huge amount of work essentially by this government to kind of reset the UK's position around its place in the world post-Brexit, post-COVID. And technology and cyber is at the core of that, and it's really good to see that. And I think that, you know, partly this is part of this is the UK's response to this whole challenge of the globalization of technology, which in the UK was very much focused through the whole debate around 5G and Huawei and all of that, which I spoke about at a previous Cipher Brief event. And I think therefore there's a big chunk of our new approach which is about how do we in the UK, in the West, really up our game in terms of building our technology capability, thinking about how we manage our use of technology from partners who we can't trust, how we collaborate internationally on developing new technology, and how we make that at the heart of what we do. And I think it's good to see that as a central part of our new approach. I think then this new review also gives us a flavour of what our next cyber strategy is going to be like. So our current cyber strategy runs out this year. Our 2016 strategy was a bit of a game changer for us in the UK. You know, it was a very holistic strategy. It looked at a whole of nation response to cyber threats. And it was about the government leaning in much more, getting much more heavily involved in the response. And one of the manifestations of that was the creation of the National Cybersecurity Centre, which Kieran, of course, stood up and was a fantastic leader of. And I think that set a great, trend for where we go. The question is where we go next. And the question is where we go next on some of these really hard and difficult questions about resilience, for example. How do we turn the dial up on resilience further across the critical national infrastructure, which of course is, the private sector primarily? What is it that government can do to incentivize that? How do we move that dial further? Because it's not moving far enough given the nature of the threats that we're facing. So so I think there's some really interesting stuff going on in the UK at the moment, and some new thinking that will play through this year. It needs to step up to those challenges, and a lot of that is about cybersecurity, absolutely rightly, because that's the core issue that we face, is the security one. But there's also some stuff around how we use offensive cyber, which maybe we'll get onto later on. So it's an interesting challenge for us, an interesting time. It's about government, it's about the private sector. First and foremost, it's about how we secure ourselves and how we achieve that resilience.
Thanks, Conrad. That was great. Alex, what do you think?
So, I mean, Rick, I looked a little bit about at the question of when criminal actors look at what happened with SolarWinds, what will they do? And what should our lessons be from that? And I think ultimately our lessons from the SolarWinds and the Hafnium experience should be that it's actually very hard to maintain stealth inside cloud-based systems these days. So intrusion is easy, but these were state actors who spent a lot of time and resource to be stealthy, to acquire pools of data that they wanted. It obviously wasn't a commercial play, and they were found out, and they were found out by a combination of US intelligence community, but also the private sector. And that's my second takeaway, is that the US private sector detection teams now constitute a kind of smart and meshed perimeter. When you look at the private sector actors in the kind of SolarWinds and the Hafnium experience, you look at how FireEye and Orion and Microsoft and Velocity and CrowdStrike all behaved. It's actually very impressive. They took a hit, but they didn't obfuscate. They took responsible actions which benefited the whole community. They worked together, and they helped very quickly the rest of the private sector identify and patch the problem. It's kind of interesting to contrast that with what happens in Russia and China, where, there is a permeability between the intelligence community and the private sector. It's the wrong kind of private sector. In Russia, it's a criminal private sector. But that permeability is around a shortage of skills, and it's around offensive attacking rather than defensive. In the US and increasingly the Western world, you are getting a flow of expertise gained inside government benefiting the private sector. And that's meshing with people who are smart in the private sector and some of the big teams that the hyperscalers have looking at intruders. So as I say, it is hard for adversaries to maintain, to sustain a presence inside cloud-based services. I think when we look at the commercial impact of SolarWinds and Hafnium, there's a kind of a J-curve effect. So initially, it's a big wake-up call for corporate America. So everyone puts up their defenses. Actually, the adoption rate of patches is good. People are listening to CISA. CISA was very quick in attribution, etc. And so, actually, the real bottom line loss in financial terms has been relatively small. But then over time, what you get is that the cyber criminals and their ecosystem, they're looking very carefully at what the state actors did. Some of those skills and techniques are flowing down to them. They're looking at, when FireEye had to release the details of its red team tools, they'll be looking at that as well. And so those skills and those techniques will over time shift into the criminal world. And so then that's when the J-curve effect kind of happens. You get an uptick then in successful cyber attacks. And I think one of the takeaways is also that we should expect cyber attacks, criminal cyber attacks, to get more personal, to get more to be more around human behavior design. because if you're a cyber criminal, it's going to get harder and harder to construct elaborate intrusion sets that get inside a big cloud-based platform. But it is always going to be an easy decision to make to scale using phishing, and humans will always be the weakest link. And I think flowing on from there, we can expect at some point the criminals to go one further and to actually use direct approaches to humans to enable them to get inside corporate systems. And we saw that a little bit, as I mentioned in my piece, with Tesla. We'll see more of that, some kind of approaches, insider approaches, seeking to use humans to get inside corporate systems. And then briefly, what can governments do? I just a couple of things that I think have been really helpful. So I think it's been really helpful over the last 6 months to see some of the big bits of criminal malware taken down in a concerted way by government agencies, I suppose. So TrickBot at the end of last year was, it was a significant reverse for some time for the criminals. And I think government is getting much better at rapid attribution, and that's really helpful. And we saw that with both Hafnium and SolarWinds, even if it wasn't, cut and wide attribution, we were left in no doubt as to who government agencies felt was behind this. So those are my conclusions.
Great. Well, thanks. So this is a question for both of you. Looking at SolarWinds, what do we think of the chances for making progress in securing the supply chain, the software that's supplied, like software bill of materials or something like that? That most modern software is very large, and nobody sits down anymore. Well, hardly anybody sits down anymore and writes code. They take pieces of code that other people have written and they assemble it. It's the analogy that we use is Lego blocks. So they're building a machine out of Lego blocks, and so and right now the provenance and the pedigree of those blocks is sometimes suspect. So is there something that private sector and/or government can do in this space?
So I mean, if I just should start on that, I mean, first of all, just to step back and kind of focus on the supply chain angle of it. I mean, obviously, the key takeaway, for the private sector and for government is this is the centrality of supply chains attacks and the nature of the risk that they present and the increasing centrality they have for us in the future. And certainly, I mean, I'm most of us involved in advising companies now we're out of government. I mean, this is one of the biggest and deepest problem for businesses as to what to do about this. And I think that, well, I hope that these attacks will kind of re-energize some of that, because it is really hard from a company's point of view. Working out the security of its supply chain is extremely difficult. And I think there are some, technology things you can do. There are some things you can do about scanning, the external collections of your supply chain to the internet, looking for vulnerabilities there. But it's only going to get you so far. And really getting under the skin of those companies and understanding their own cybersecurity posture is very challenging. And I mean, I think there is a risk that, there's a feeling that, well, in companies, we just need to do a bit more cybersecurity, or we just need our cyber teams to do a bit more with the supply chain. And I'm not sure how far that's going to go. I think, there's a critical thing here for me about getting into the commercial relationships with the supply chain. So this is not about your own security team alone fixing this problem. This is not about technology solutions alone. This is about making cybersecurity front and center in the commercial relationship you have with your suppliers. And it's about making it one of the sort of top 2 or 3 things that you talk about with the suppliers. And I think it's about ensuring that those parts of the business that are leading on those relationships, have the confidence to discuss cybersecurity issues, and that you find kind of commercial levers to bring those into play. So I think from the point of view of how does a business respond to a supply chain attack, which we've talked about a lot in boards, but not necessarily really got to the heart of it, I think it's really important for boards to think about this not just from a technology point of view, but from the whole fundamental nature of their commercial relationship and what they expect from their suppliers and how they sort of operationalize that in a commercial sense. I think then the much broader question, you know, this is the key question about globalization of technology and how do we assure ourselves about the supply chain when the supply chain is coming from, you know, goodness knows where in multiple different pieces in a way that, you know, it's whatever the flag on the product you're buying, you know, who knows what's sitting underneath it. And I think, you know, again, it comes back to taking some risk management approaches for government. So I think some of the thinking that, you know, the NCSC did around the context of 5G is important here. It's about, you know, good cybersecurity standards, because you're basically not going to solve the problem by waving a magic wand and suddenly creating secure by design across the globe. So you have to front and center have good cybersecurity. You need to have a diversity in the supply chain. So how do we assure diversity in the supply chain? That's part of, you know, a lot of the thinking that's going on in the UK now, I think. And then there's the thing about building resilience into design. So expecting, you know, it's when, not if, having designs that can respond in a resilient way to when attacks take place. So all of those things are kind of managing the risks there. Then I think more broadly, there's a whole question about security standards, influencing standards bodies. How do you influence standards for security within IoT technology and so on? And I think there is a thing for, you know, Western governments to become more forward-leaning in how they engage with those global standards bodies and make sure that our voices are heard, and that, you know, the demand for an improvement in standards in these products is heard. And I think that's part of a much broader question about, you know, getting the Western view of a free, open, peaceful, secure internet, of technology that's secure, getting that front and center against a vision from China or Russia that's frankly quite attractive to a lot of countries around the world. So as with lots of things in cyber, I think, you know, it's hard, and it's about a multiple different set of interventions and activities. A lot of it fundamentally is about the best security we can get. It's about resilience, it's about standards raising, and it's about managing risk, I think, and we have to accept that. You know, there is no easy answer to this, in my view.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Rick, it won't be any surprise to Conrad, but I'm going to be much more tactical on this. So, you know, the way I look at it is exactly the way you hinted at in your kind of setup, which is there's going to be 500 million apps published next year. Much of the work of the building blocks of those apps will be SDKs, software development kits. You know, there will be those building blocks that you described, and you know, the reality is that those SDKs won't have been completely checked out, you know, for bugs, and there is the ability to insert malware into those nexus points, which is what our, you know, adversaries will want to do. So there is a real issue there, and I think vetting those building blocks is important, and using AI to vet those building blocks is important. And you could see, you know, Microsoft and Apple and others thinking of doing that, or doing that. I'd say another thing, which is a real revelation to me in the private sector, and I think we need to do more of it, is that, you know, when you sat where you sat, Rick or Conrad, and you know, you were in charge of a SIGINT machine, and you could see right into, with great detail, some problems, you know, with an endoscope. That's one really powerful thing. But what's also powerful is if you're able to have a metricated, empirical view of the incidence of different types of cyber attack across an entire corporate marketplace. And so if you could look at corporate America and go, you know what, I'm seeing that this particular SDK, this building block, is being routinely used and with great frequency, and it's led to this amount of loss. If you could gaze across the whole corporate marketplace, that's really helpful. And at the moment, only a few companies can do that. The insurance companies, some of the big antivirus companies can see that. And I think it's really important to develop a whole of corporate America, corporate UK view to understand where the incidence is, and you know, which problems we need to fix first.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Thanks. Anytime we talk about supply chain and that sort of thing, I'm always reminded of the Equifax event where I'm on the board of a bank in the U.S. and every bank, every financial institution in the world interviewed Equifax and had a relationship, and they just didn't tell us the truth. So, what are you going to do? And banks have thousands of those relationships, and so how do you get to ground truth in that space? It's a really hard problem. But thanks for your views on that. Suzanne, you there? Of course you're there.
I am here. I am always here listening.
I knew that.
Just like the NSA. Just kidding. This is
The government really listens.
It's a fantastic conversation. I think, just the idea of what we heard Brad Smith talk about yesterday, and then Alex, what you just mentioned, which is the number of apps coming out on the market and the likelihood that some of those apps are going to contain some type of malicious software makes me a lot more worried about what I'm going to download, what my kids are going to download, everything that's going to be on my system. And Rick, I still always come back to your super basic advice to people like me. Turn your phone off every day, turn it back on every day, restart your computer every day. And I just feel like it's just getting so much harder to stay on top of all these things. So it'll be interesting, gentlemen, to see how AI is applied in sort of trying to detect some of this malicious code before, everybody in the world has a new candy game that they want to download and play, and all of a sudden it's tracking every move you make. So you can tell my mind is a little bit in the movies, but I feel like this is becoming way more reality. So thank you so much for joining us for this session. I think it was very insightful. We really appreciate that you contributed to this conversation over these last 3 days, which has just been phenomenal. So thank you both.
Alex, Conrad, thanks very much. And I am going to go, as soon as we're done here, go read both your papers. So.
Yes, Cipherbrief.com, 2 very smart pieces. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.